Welcome to On the Road with Chelmsford Museum, a series to start conversations about the history on our doorsteps. I'm Chris Scott, a museum volunteer, and I'll be taking you back to 16th century Chelmsford and a dark episode in the city's history. Many years ago, a friend asked me to work as a designer on his book called The Witchcraft Papers, and my interest in this infamous period began. Walking through the high street on a sunny day like today, it seems impossible that this could have been a place of terrible persecution for hundreds of women and men. In 1563, during the reign of Elizabeth I, Parliament passed an act against conjurations, enchantments and witchcrafts. It wasn't the first piece of legislation about witchcraft, but it was much tougher than acts that had come before. A deadly period of prosecutions and executions of Essex women was to follow, and many of the trials were held here in the county town just off the High Street. One of the first cases which caused a sensation at the time was the trial of a woman called Agnes Waterhouse in 1566. To find out more about how it all began, we need to get on the road to visit a parish outside the city. Travel 6 miles northeast of Chelmsford, and you come to Hatfield Peveril, a village with a long history. This church, St Andrew's, just behind me, sits on the site of a college founded in the 11th century, which later became a Benedictine priory. It's one of the few buildings in this village that would have been around during the late Tudor period, when Hatfield Peveril became famous for the so-called witches who lived here. In the modern-day village, it's hard to believe that anyone could have been charged with a crime like witchcraft, because it all sounds so utterly ridiculous. But in 1566, 3 Hatfield Peveril women were accused of witchcraft and put on trial. There were Agnes Waterhouse, her daughter Joan, and a woman who was probably Agnes's sister called Elizabeth Frances. We know a lot about their trial because of a sensational pamphlet produced just afterwards called The Examination and Confession of Certain Witches at Chelmsford in the county of Essex. This lurid and fantastical account, reproduced in Peter Henny's book, described how a white spotted cat called Satan, initially given to Elizabeth, acted as a familiar for all 3 women at various times, enabling them to carry out acts of witchcraft against others. We may think the Elizabethan era is a golden age, with many similarities to our own. But life in 16th century Essex was hard, and people lived in fear of the plague, famine and war. Science and medicine were almost unknown to most, and superstition and belief in the devil were often used to explain everyday problems. The fear of witchcraft really took hold in Essex over the following decades, and you can see evidence of the way people attempted to protect themselves in the Tudor galleries of Chelmsford Museum. Look out for a beer jug, which would have been filled with things like nail clippings, hair, and even urine, to replicate the essence of a person to draw away spells. So what happened to these women? We've come back to the city to find out. Young Joan Waterhouse was acquitted, and Elizabeth Frances was sentenced to a year's imprisonment. Agnes was not so lucky. The judges, who included the Attorney General no less, found her guilty of bewitching her neighbour to death, and Agnes was executed shortly afterwards, just near here, where Waterhouse Lane meets Rainsford Road, on July the 29th, 1566. The public gallows was situated outside the town, just along this road, and this would have been where poor Mother Waterhouse met her death. As you drive, walk or cycle through this part of the city, remember Agnes and scores of other women persecuted during this deadly period. Although this part of Chelmsford history is hard to look back on, acknowledging the painful aspect of our past is just as important as celebrating our successes. You can find out more about the witch trials in Essex at Chelmsford Museum, and if you see me at Oaklands when you next visit, stop me and talk about the Essex witch trials.